The smell of sin, that was the first thing I sensed when I turned the key in the lock. Stale perfume lingering in the hallway, mixed with something warmer, muskier. We had nothing. That thought flickered in my mind the moment I opened the door. My pulse throbbed in my temple, and my hand felt unsteady on the doorknob. There, in the heavy silence, I caught that scent. I knew exactly what it meant. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I'd left the office early, citing a headache. I remember the hush of the suburban street outside as I stepped onto the porch, so quiet you could hear the hum of a distant lawnmower. Even the air smelled tense, like ozone before a storm. I walked in, set my briefcase down, and listened. No TV, no kitchen sounds, no cheerful greeting of "Honey, you're home." Instead, I heard subdued movement at the far end of the house. My bedroom. Our bedroom. The hallway felt too long, as if it had grown overnight. Each step gave a soft creak against the hardwood floor. My shirt clung to me. I was sweating despite the air conditioner running. That smell, sweet and wrong, urged me forward. I didn't call out Emma's name. I said nothing. Silence has always been my shield. An old habit, maybe. At the threshold, I paused. The bedroom door was cracked open, letting out slow, muffled sounds. The curtains were drawn, so only a line of light fell across the carpet. It cut the room in half, like a stage. My heart hammered. Part of me wanted to burst in, part of me wanted to turn around, go back to the car, and pretend I never came home. I stood there long enough to sense the shift in the air. The rustling of sheets stopped. The tension deepened. Then I pushed the door open. She was there, on the bed, half covered by a twisted sheet. Emma, my wife. Next to her, I caught a glimpse of him, Mark, the man with the sun-kissed hair and that easy, relaxed grin. The grin was absent now, replaced by wide-eyed panic. A second later, Emma gasped, but it felt forced, like she barely had the energy to muster shock. I breathed in once, deep, as though bracing for an impact. Then I just stared. The whir of the ceiling fan seemed louder than any words I might have found. Emma tried to speak, but the words never formed. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Mark fumbled for his jeans on the floor. In those few seconds, I felt everything that tied me to sanity snap, one brittle thread at a time. But I said nothing. I turned around, left the room, and walked out of the house. That was the beginning of the end. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, maybe 10. My hands were clenched around the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I stared at the garage door, the same door that had welcomed me home for years. I tried to recall the day we first moved into this house. Cardboard boxes stacked in the living room, a sense of promise in the air. Emma had joked that we'd grow old here. We'd fill the walls with memories, pictures of birthdays and holidays. Now that future seemed distant, if not impossible. I breathed in, trying to calm the storm inside. My father used to say that silence is sometimes the only answer a man can give. Better to say nothing than to regret every word. But 1,000 thoughts swarmed in my head. Was this the first time? How had it gotten this far? And above all, why? All I could think was that I'd felt this coming, but had pretended otherwise. The lateness of her nights, the text messages she concealed behind a quick click, the new, expensive manicure that always seemed fresh. I dismissed them as coincidence or indulgence. A man who works in finance sees patterns all day long, but I refused to see the pattern in my own marriage. Eventually, the front door opened behind me. I heard footsteps approach the car, then slow. I didn't turn my head. In the rearview mirror, I saw Mark rush down the driveway, shirt half-buttoned, heading for his own car parked on the curb. He glanced in my direction. His face looked stricken, as if he wanted to say something but feared that any word might trigger me. He got into his car and pulled away. Then, Emma's voice, small and broken, floated across the driveway. A single "please," followed by my name. She stood there, arms folded over her chest, still wearing the bathrobe she must have thrown on in a hurry. Her hair was disheveled, and I could see a faint flush in her cheeks. Guilt, fear, or both. When I didn't respond, she took a step closer, then stopped. That same old sweet, helpless expression she used to get when something was beyond her control. But my heart, once so quick to melt at her vulnerability, felt like stone. I turned the key in the ignition and drove off without meeting her eyes. We had once been happy, or so I tell myself. I try to remember the feeling of fresh love, that excitement when we first met at college in Illinois, the way her laughter had filled every corner of the campus quad. She was the bright spirit, always dragging me to some new activity, an art exhibit, a food fair, a friend's party. I was content to follow. I cherished her confidence, her spark. We married young, eager to build a future. I stepped into the financial world. She tried marketing, then freelanced. We got this house. 3 bedrooms, enough for a family we thought we'd have someday. But the years wore grooves between us, little cracks that deepened. My job demanded time. Her ambitions shifted. We drifted into parallel routines, occasionally intersecting for dinner or idle weekend errands. And in that slow drift, she found something else. Someone else. I learned about Mark weeks earlier, though I told myself it was just my imagination. A slip of paper in her purse, a DNA test kit receipt with a scribbled name. From M. Or the time she mentioned a new friend who was involved in beauty services downtown. The gift she brought home with an embroidered initial that wasn't mine. I brushed it aside, thinking maybe she'd made a mistake. Then the air grew thick with unanswered questions. I felt each one like a phantom bruise. After that day, the day of the discovery, I spent hours driving aimlessly around Chicago. I rolled down the window and let the humid summer air assault my face, as if punishing myself for not seeing the truth sooner. My phone rang incessantly. I didn't answer. By evening, I forced myself to head back home, maybe out of habit more than forgiveness. I walked in, and she stood in the kitchen. She'd changed clothes, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, though the temperature outside was far too warm. The sweater was like a shield. Her eyes were red from crying. I still said nothing. She approached me, tried to hold my hand, and started explaining. All I caught were fragments. It's not what you think. We never planned it. I'm sorry. But apologies felt hollow. I stepped back, shaking my head. She asked if we could talk in the living room. I nodded, still silent. She led the way, hugging her arms to herself. We stood by the window. She wanted me to say something. She kept looking at me expectantly, tears brimming. But anger had numbed my voice. She pressed further, asking me to understand, to at least respond. I clenched my jaw. My throat felt tight, my mind a spinning reel of images. Her, Mark, our bed. Her words barely registered. She tried to reassure me it was a mistake, that it was physical, or that it was emotional but not meant to betray me, that she still loved me. Or maybe she said none of these things. I'm not sure. All I heard was noise. The memory of the day overshadowed everything. Eventually, she gave up, stepped away from me, tears sliding down her cheeks. That was the night I slept on the couch for the first time in 15 years. The night everything started to wither. I forced myself to go back to work the next day. My coworkers greeted me with the usual polite nods. I must have looked normal enough. No one asked questions. I sat at my desk, opened spreadsheets, typed emails, made phone calls. On the surface, life went on. But inside, I was unraveling. My chest felt hollow. The ring on my finger felt foreign, an unwelcome band of metal. I avoided going home until I was sure Emma would be asleep. She tried waiting up, leaving lights on, presumably hoping we might talk. But I'd slip quietly in, turn the lamp off, and sink into the living room chair. This became our pattern. When she left for her morning jog, I'd head to the shower, leaving minimal overlap for contact. I didn't want to see the remorse in her eyes. Maybe because it threatened to break my silence. And once I started speaking, I feared I wouldn't be able to stop the torrent of bitterness. A week passed like that, each day colder than the last. Then came the confrontation I couldn't avoid. She found me in the garage, rummaging through a toolbox I rarely used. I guess I was looking for something to occupy my hands, some old project I could bury myself in. She slipped inside, arms folded. Her voice was quiet but determined. She said we needed to face this. She said she wanted to end the affair. She told me that Mark was a mistake, that it had begun with friendly chats at his salon. Flirting, attention, a sense of feeling alive again. Then it escalated. She claimed she never meant to hurt me. I let her speak, rummaging through wrenches and screwdrivers, though I didn't need any of them. Finally, I turned to her. The exhaustion in my eyes must have startled her, because she stepped back slightly. I managed a few words, cold as steel. I told her I wasn't sure I believed her. Then I went inside, leaving her alone in the stale garage air. Loneliness in a living marriage. That phrase haunted me. I was alone, yet she was still there. We passed each other like strangers. The house felt claustrophobic. The pictures on the walls. Photos of us at our wedding, at the Grand Canyon, on a cruise, mocked me. I notice each frame more than ever, realize how artificial those moments seemed now. One evening, something in me snapped. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, fiddling with her phone. I recognized the glow in her eyes, the same glow I'd seen whenever she was lost in text conversations. My heart lurched. Without speaking, I walked over and plucked the phone from her hand. She resisted, startled. I pressed the lock button. She stared at me, fear mingling with anger. She said my name, asked me what I was doing. I returned the phone to her, with a look that said I had no intention of explaining myself. Then I left. She didn't follow. That night, I tried to sleep but found no peace. Memories hammered at me. Her laughter with him. The way she might have whispered things to him, she never whispered to me. The look on her face when I found them. My mind conjured images of them entangled, sweat-soaked, oblivious to everything but each other. I wanted to erase those visions. I wanted to confront her, to rage, to punish. But my voice was locked behind the heavy gates of silence. 3 days later, I finally allowed the words to come. She sat on the couch, arms wrapped around herself, eyes puffy with tears. She'd been trying to talk to me, but I either left the room or stayed silent. This time, I stopped in front of her. She looked up. I told her I knew about the test kit, and that I suspected she'd done something far more significant than a random fling. Something to confirm or deny a suspicion, maybe. She said she'd done a DNA test for a reason, that she suspected a possibility. My stomach twisted. I recalled the slip of paper with from Mem. She insisted Mark had convinced her to check. Some half-baked notion about genealogical curiosity, about wanting to see if they shared some distant ancestry. I couldn't even parse that. It felt like a smokescreen, an attempt to justify deeper involvement. The mere fact she let him be so intimate, so enmeshed in her personal life, burned me. I told her I was done pretending. Then I turned away, heading to the backyard. She followed. We stood among the rose bushes that she used to prune so carefully. They'd grown wild and unkempt, reflecting the state of our relationship. I recalled the sweet fragrance mixing with the faint chlorine scent from our neglected pool. Overhead, the sky was that faint purple you get before total darkness. I told her, for the first time, how betrayed I felt, how humiliating it was to see them together, to recall all the nights I'd slept alone, suspecting but refusing to see. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. I didn't want excuses. I just wanted her to understand I was on the edge, that I didn't see a future with her anymore. She broke down, sobbing, trying to cling to me. I let her for a moment. My arms were stiff at my sides. She whispered that she was sorry, that she'd do anything to fix it, that she'd end any contact with Mark. She told me I was still her husband, still the man she loved. I took a step back. Even if that was true, I couldn't feel it. The numbness was all-consuming. After that conversation, I began thinking about how I could reclaim control. At work, I was calm but mechanical, completing tasks by rote. At home, I watched Emma from across the room, noticing every nervous gesture. She was afraid to leave me alone for too long, afraid to mention Mark's name or even talk about her day. The tension got so thick that it strangled any attempt at normalcy. We lived in separate corners of the house, speaking only when necessary. In the second week after the discovery, she came to me one evening. I was in the study, the place I used to read or do weekend catch-up on spreadsheets. She said she'd scheduled an appointment with a marriage counselor and hoped I'd come. She'd do whatever it took. She was trembling, yet determined. I stared at her, scanning her face. Red-rimmed eyes, a slight tremor in her lip. Part of me wanted to see if she was sincere. Another part of me wondered if it was just panic because she'd been caught. I closed the laptop, considering my answer. Then, after a long pause, I said no. I stood up, left the room. Her voice broke behind me as she tried to call me back. I didn't stop. We had nothing, I reminded myself. Nothing but a marriage certificate and a house that felt like a tomb. She tried, for days after, to persuade me. She left pamphlets on the counter, wrote me notes. I tossed them in a drawer without looking. My silence grew into a wall, and I realized I wanted that wall. She'd betrayed me, and I couldn't see past that. The final straw was an unexpected text message on my phone one evening. It was from Mark. Somehow, he'd gotten my number. His words were short, an attempt at an apology. He said he owed me an explanation, that he never meant to cause me pain, that Emma deserved better than my silent resentment. That line fanned my fury. She deserved better. I read it twice, chest burning. Then I smashed my phone onto the kitchen floor. Emma heard the noise and rushed in. She saw me standing there, phone in pieces, my breath ragged. I stared at her, and she knew who the text must have been from. She tried to approach me, but I brushed past her. That was the moment I realized this had to end. I started planning. Rage bubbled under my quiet exterior, but I didn't show it on my face. I'd come home each evening, not if she spoke, or give a clipped reply at best. On the surface, I was functioning. Underneath, I was preparing for revenge. I didn't want to lash out blindly. I wanted it cold, precise. My father once told me that if you aim to punish, do it carefully. Let your enemy not see it coming. I put together the financial pieces first. I withdrew a sum of money from our joint savings, discreetly, over several days. Not enough to raise alarm, but enough for me to set aside for what I might do next. I sorted out potential legal aspects if I ended up divorcing her. My job gave me resources, connections. I even had a contact in a private investigation agency, someone who specialized in discreet tracking or background checks. I wanted to know everything about Mark. His background, his finances, his weaknesses. Over a few nights, I compiled what I found. Mark co-owned a high-end salon in downtown Chicago, catered to wealthy clients, had a comfortable lifestyle. He was proud of that place, his baby. He poured years and money into making it flourish. I learned he was single, but he'd had a string of relationships. I discovered that the salon's lease was precarious. Someone else actually owned the property, and Mark's contract was up for renewal soon. My mind churned with ideas. I pictured a scenario where I could sabotage that lease, drive him out of business, or maybe I'd spread rumors among his top clients, who prized discretion and might not welcome a scandal. The simplest route was to inform them that their beloved nail technician was sleeping with a married woman, turning the place's name into a swirl of negative publicity. Nothing illegal, just strategic, but it didn't feel like enough. My rage wanted something more personal, more direct. Meanwhile, I watched Emma. She moved around the house like a wraith, subdued and hollow. She tried to keep up appearances, a newly bought coffee mug here, fresh flowers there, but the cracks were too wide. I wondered if she sensed my intent. She saw me rummaging through documents, locked away in the study for hours. Maybe she chalked it up to a midlife crisis. I'd always been methodical, and she might have thought I was burying myself in work. She had no idea I was orchestrating a quiet storm. The only moment that almost shook my resolve was an evening when I found her sitting alone in the dark, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked so small, so vulnerable. She didn't say a word, and neither did I. I felt a pang in my chest, remembering how once upon a time I would have knelt beside her, held her, told her everything would be all right. But that tenderness was gone. She'd shattered it, so I walked away. The climactic turn came 2 weeks after I learned about his text. I discovered Emma had gone to see Mark again. I wasn't sure if it was out of lingering affection, or maybe she was truly telling him goodbye, or maybe she needed closure. Whichever it was, I found out from a mutual acquaintance, someone who'd spotted them at a small bistro near Mark's salon. Maybe Emma intended it to be the last meeting, but to me, it was the final betrayal. She promised me she wouldn't see him anymore, yet there she was, meeting him in public. That night, I confronted her properly. I arrived home earlier than usual, found her in the living room. I began to speak, and she seemed relieved that I was finally acknowledging her. But relief turned to dread when she caught the ice in my voice. I asked her if she'd seen him again. She looked away, trying to formulate an answer. I demanded honesty. With trembling lips, she admitted they'd met, that she told him it was over, that she wanted no further contact. I asked why she hadn't told me before. She said she was scared that any mention of him would drive me further away. Her tears fell freely, but I was numb. We moved to the dining room. She tried to say she wished to move on with me, that she loved me, that she'd do anything to make amends. I didn't yell. My voice was soft, deadly calm. I told her I wanted out, that this marriage was a shell. She pleaded with me, insisted we try. We stared at each other under the harsh overhead light, the rest of the house dark, full of shadows. Slowly, I spelled out what I intended. I was considering a separation. She sank into a chair, her face pale. She begged me not to do this. I stood there, arms stiff, and repeated that I was done. Suddenly, she got up, came close to me, touched my face. I didn't recoil, but I didn't lean into it, either. She whispered that she knew she'd destroyed us, but she couldn't bear to lose me. She asked if I remembered the day we moved in, how she said this place would be our forever home. Tears glimmered in her eyes. When I stayed silent, she dropped her hand. The distance between us felt final. She pleaded again. Counseling. A fresh start, anything. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I said I was leaving that night. I would stay at a hotel. She sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. I walked upstairs, packed a small bag, and left without another word. Revenge doesn't always have to be a grand act. Sometimes it's the abrupt withdrawal of everything you once gave freely. But I wasn't finished. I wanted Mark to feel the sting as well. The next morning, I placed a few calls. One was to a friend of mine, a property investor who had ties in Chicago real estate. I asked him about the building Mark's salon occupied. He said the building was indeed coming up for a new lease negotiation. The conversation ended with a cryptic promise from my friend that he'd see what could be done. I also composed an email to a local influencer who specialized in lifestyle and beauty tips. Under a pseudonym, I carefully crafted a message suggesting that a certain well-known nail salon had employees who blurred professional boundaries, sleeping with married clients. I hinted that the salon was a facade for scandal. I attached no proof, but I knew how gossip in that circle worked. Innuendo was often enough to start a small blaze. If it spread, Mark might find his appointments canceled by outraged patrons. Then I waited. My heart pounded with each step I took. I was on my own now, lodged in a modest hotel near the office. The nights felt cold, even though summer heat still pressed down on the city. But in that lonely cold, I also felt a grim satisfaction. Mark had trespassed into my life. Emma had let him. This was how I evened the scales. Weeks passed, and the effect rippled. I heard from one of my old acquaintances that Mark's salon had started losing a few key clients, women who decided to take their business elsewhere. Rumors circulated that the place wasn't as discreet or as professional as it seemed. Then, my friend in real estate mentioned that Mark was having trouble securing a fair renewal on his lease. The landlord, influenced by some behind-the-scenes persuasion, demanded an increase in rent. Not a small increase, but a near 20% hike, enough to threaten Mark's profitability. I took no direct part beyond that phone call, but I felt no remorse about how it played out. Emma tried to contact me every day. Texts, calls, voice messages. I usually ignored them. Occasionally, late at night, I'd sit on the hotel bed, my phone in hand, reading her messages. The longing in her words was palpable. She wrote about her regrets, about wanting to fix everything, about how she couldn't sleep in our bed without me there. She apologized for every lie, for every broken promise. Yet I felt empty. I tried to recall the warmth of our early years, but the memory slipped away. One afternoon, I met with a divorce attorney. I wanted to understand my options. The attorney explained the implications, splitting assets, potential support, the usual procedure. I listened calmly, as though we were discussing someone else's life. The attorney asked me if I was certain about this step. I said I didn't know yet. I just needed information. That night, in the solitary hush of my hotel room, I sat in a chair by the window, letting the city lights wash over me. I pictured Emma alone in our house, waiting. Then I pictured Mark, frantically trying to salvage his salon. I found no real pleasure in it, just a stark acknowledgement that I was in control now. The day of reckoning arrived on a Sunday. I remember because the streets were less busy, and a sense of slow calm draped the city. Emma had asked me to come by the house to pick up some documents and mail that had arrived for me. Reluctantly, I agreed. When I showed up, the living room was dim, blinds half closed. She was waiting, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. No makeup, no jewelry. She offered me a seat. I declined. She handed me a pile of letters, mostly bills. Then she said we needed to talk, that I owed her at least that much, face to face. I shrugged, folding my arms, and told her to say whatever she needed. She started softly, carefully, explaining that she'd cut all contact with Mark, blocked his number, avoided his salon, told him never to reach out again. She said she'd realized too late how precious our marriage was, that she was tired of living in guilt. She looked me in the eye, tears threatening, and said she was willing to face any consequence if it meant there was even a sliver of hope. I leaned against the wall, letting her words sink in. She asked if I still loved her. My heart twitched, but I remained silent. She insisted she was telling the truth, that she'd do anything to prove it. She offered to sign a postnuptial agreement, to accept any conditions, anything to show she was committed. Her voice trembled as she admitted she'd lost sight of our bond, got swept up in the thrill of new attention, the excitement Mark offered. That she never stopped caring for me, even if it looked that way. A part of me wanted to believe her. But I remembered the bed, the tangle of sheets, the quiet gasps. I remembered all the nights of suspicion. The text from Mark telling me she deserved better. I let that memory fester. Her sorrow was real, but my pain was real too. So I told her I'd been planning to end everything. Divorce, walk away. She bowed her head in acceptance, tears dripping onto the floor. She said if that was what I truly wanted, she'd grant it. But she had one request, to speak openly, no secrets, for just one conversation. After that, if I wanted to leave, she wouldn't stop me. I agreed. Maybe I was curious, or maybe I owed her that final courtesy. She began haltingly, describing how lonely she felt in our marriage, how distant I'd been. She said she hadn't felt chosen by me in years, that I was always working, always focusing on the future, never on the present. She told me that at first, Mark was just a spark of attention, someone who seemed to see her as exciting. She swore she never planned to sleep with him, that she tried to resist, but her own emptiness led her down that path. She recognized that it was her fault, and she took the blame. She said nothing could justify the betrayal, but she hoped I'd at least understand what shaped her decisions. I stared at the table as she spoke, taking it in. My anger didn't vanish, but it shifted. It's not easy to hear how you failed your spouse, especially when you're consumed by your own sense of being wronged. There's a fine line between being the victim and acknowledging you played a role in the breakdown. I felt tears threaten the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. The only sign of my turmoil was a slow, trembling exhale. She finished by asking if there was any place left in my heart for forgiveness. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned away, heading for the door. She didn't follow me. She didn't beg or plead. I left with a swirl of conflicting emotions, more exhausted than angry. By the time I reached the hotel, I realized I had a choice. I could proceed with the divorce, cut ties, move on, let my orchestrated vengeance linger as the final note of our relationship, or I could step back from the brink and ask myself if I truly wanted to throw away the years we'd had. The question dug at me. Sleep wouldn't come. Around midnight, I grabbed my keys and decided I needed a drive to clear my head. I ended up in the old neighborhood near the university where we'd studied. I found the bench where Emma and I once shared coffee, laughing about our future. The campus was quiet now, the street lamps casting orange halos in the darkness. Sitting there, I let the memories flow. The time I proposed to her, trembling with excitement. The time she nursed me through a nasty flu, wiping my forehead and cooking me soup. The day we took the keys to our new house. Those memories felt distant, but not gone. At some point, tears slid down my cheeks. I let them. For the first time since the affair, I wasn't just raging. I was grieving what we once had. When the sky began to lighten, I knew I had a decision to make. I felt no immediate forgiveness in my heart. But I also sensed that running away wouldn't mend the deeper wound. A man can hide behind silence only so long before it devours him. The revenge I'd set in motion against Mark had played out. Reports said his salon was in danger. His lease renewal was uncertain. The gossip was harming his reputation. I imagined him in some fancy office, begging a landlord or a bank for leniency, feeling the pressure I'd arranged. And I admit, a part of me still felt a grim satisfaction. But as the days passed, I realized it hadn't healed me. All I had was the knowledge that I'd struck back. I decided I needed to speak with Emma face to face, without rancor, without stonewalling. So on a humid afternoon, I drove to the house. She opened the door, eyes wary. I stepped inside, inhaling the familiar air that held faint echoes of perfume and grief. We sat at the dining table, across from each other. I told her that I was done with silence, that we needed to see if we could salvage anything, or else finalize our separation. She nodded, swallowing hard. For the next 3 hours, we talked. Not just about the affair, but about the years that led to it. Our miscommunications, the slow drift. She confessed again to feeling unappreciated, invisible. I admitted that I'd been emotionally absent, laser-focused on work. She said she knew that didn't excuse her actions. I said I understood people sometimes make terrible choices when starved for affection. We both cried, though not dramatically, more a steady, tired release of tension. Near the end, she asked if I would consider counseling with her. This time, I paused. Something in me had softened, though the hurt was still raw. I told her I wasn't sure if trust could be rebuilt, but if there was even a fraction of a chance, we should try. She exhaled, relief and sorrow mingling on her face. That night, for the first time in weeks, I stayed in the guest bedroom instead of leaving. It wasn't a reconciliation, just a tiny step toward letting her know I was willing to see if the pieces could be picked up. She thanked me quietly. I didn't respond. But the next morning, I asked if she wanted coffee. The awkward smile she gave me had a hint of the warmth we once shared. Still, the final blow of my revenge had yet to fall. My friend in real estate texted me with updates. Mark was struggling to secure a viable lease. He might have to relocate, maybe even close his salon. Each message fed my sense of grim closure. Emma didn't know I had orchestrated any of it, and I didn't see a reason to tell her. That was my private answer to what Mark had done. Maybe it was petty, but I never claimed to be above pettiness after that betrayal. Emma started attending counseling sessions on her own first, then I joined her. We sat in a softly lit room, across from a therapist who asked pointed questions about trust and communication. At times, the tension nearly drove me to walk out. But Emma's willingness to face the discomfort, to open up about her flaws, kept me from giving up. I spoke about how her deception cut me deeply, how the image of her with Mark haunted me. She cried, apologizing over and over. It was raw, painful, but genuine. The therapist guided us, trying to create a space where we could reflect on how we reached this point. After several sessions, I realized I had a choice. Dwell in endless anger or attempt to move forward, whether with or without her. I told Emma that I remained uncertain about a future together, but I wouldn't shut the door just yet. She said she understood, that she'd fight for any piece of hope I offered. One late evening, we sat on the porch, a lukewarm breeze drifting by. She asked me if I wanted to know what had happened to Mark. I stiffened, glancing at her. She explained that she'd heard from a mutual friend that Mark's salon was facing closure. She said she hadn't spoken to him, that he'd tried to call her once or twice, but she never picked up. She asked if I felt any satisfaction, hearing he was losing what mattered most to him. A cautious look crossed her face, as if she suspected I might have had a hand in it. I stared at the dark sky, the occasional flicker of lightning on the horizon. In the hush, all I said was that he'd earned whatever consequences came. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then she whispered that she was sorry for everything. I listened to the night's silence. The crickets provided a steady hum. Eventually, I told her yes. I was satisfied, momentarily. But then I discovered that vengeance wasn't enough to fill the void left by betrayal. She placed her hand on mine. I didn't pull away. We sat there until the summer night grew colder. Gradually, the tension in our house eased, replaced by a timid attempt at rebuilding. I moved from the guest room back to our old bedroom. Though for a while, I slept near the edge, uncertain. We resumed mundane routines, grocery shopping, tidying up, occasionally having dinner together. It felt strange at first, as though we were performing a dance we'd long forgotten. But the more we did it, the more natural it became. In therapy, we confronted each fresh wave of regret, anger, and sorrow. Emma apologized not just in words, but in actions. She made an effort to be transparent, to share her day-to-day life, her phone, her thoughts. I tried to be present, to look her in the eye, to recognize her emotions. It wasn't easy. Sometimes I'd look at her and still see Mark's hands on her skin. But at least I was letting myself feel something beyond numbness. And in my darkest moments, I recalled Mark's downfall. A quiet part of me found a twisted solace in that. The man who intruded on my life was now flailing. Maybe he'd learn a lesson. Maybe he'd blame me. It didn't matter. A rational part of me knew revenge was fleeting, that it wouldn't magically restore my trust in Emma. But it gave me a small, vicious sense of equilibrium. Months passed. My father called from Arizona, asking how we were doing, hinting that he sensed something was off. I gave him half-truths, said we were working through some issues. Emma's parents checked in as well, though she was even more reluctant to share details. We both preferred to handle this ourselves. One autumn day, she asked if I wanted to take a drive back to our old campus. We hadn't visited in years. She suggested that maybe seeing where we started would remind us of what we still had, if anything. I agreed with some hesitation. We drove in relative silence. She seemed nervous, fiddling with the radio, glancing at me as if unsure whether to speak. When we arrived, we strolled around the campus green. Students rushed by, carefree and young. We found that old bench. It looked more worn. The paint chipped. We sat down, side by side, letting memories flood back. Emma broke the silence, saying she regretted taking our bond for granted, that she realized how fragile loyalty could be when neglected. She placed her hand over mine, and I felt a tremor in her grip. I believed she was telling the truth. A few tears slipped down her cheeks. For the first time, I leaned closer, pressed a gentle hand to her back. She turned to me, and in that moment, we shared a quiet understanding. We were both deeply hurt, but we weren't ready to discard the years we'd spent together. We spent a few hours there, visiting old haunts, remembering simpler times. On the drive home, I found myself relaxing enough to talk about the possibility of our future. I told her that trust had to be rebuilt from scratch, that we might fail. She said she knew, but we agreed to try. That winter, we moved forward like novices, rediscovering each other's rhythms. Counseling continued, and we had painful conversations about how she'd been with Mark. The intimate details, the emotional closeness. I hated hearing it, but I needed to understand. She never tried to minimize her betrayal, and I appreciated that honesty. Over time, my resentment simmered down to an ache rather than a raging fire. I couldn't say we were fully healed. Scars remain. Yet the glimmer of possibility was there. An honest attempt at forging a new path. Every day was a choice to stay, to see if we could make it. I told her I wasn't sure I would ever forget, but maybe I could forgive enough to move on. She accepted that uncertainty, determined to prove her remorse. And so we came to the final stretch of this story. A year after that afternoon I caught them. I stood in the backyard, staring at the rose bushes, now trimmed and well-tended once more. The pool water shimmered under the sun, clean and inviting. Emma emerged from the house with 2 glasses of iced tea, set one on a small patio table near me. She looked at me with a tentative smile. I nodded my thanks. No one spoke, but the air felt lighter than it had in months. I've been told that cold is also an emotion. I believe that. My anger had turned to cold resolve, then to something else, an uneasy acceptance. There are days when the memory rushes back, and I feel that old fury. But I remind myself that I chose to stay, that as a man I wanted to see if love could survive the worst. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't, but I'm determined to give it a chance. As for Mark, I heard he relocated to another part of the city, started over with a smaller salon, less glamorous. Maybe he's learned a lesson, or maybe he's moved on to his next conquest. I don't really care. My revenge was delivered, though it didn't heal me instantly. Healing came from facing the truth with Emma, slowly sifting through the rubble. In the end, real victory is deciding not to be consumed by hate. A cold wind rustled the branches of our old oak tree. I took a sip of iced tea, tasted the mild sweetness. Emma stood by my side, gazing at the sky. We exchanged a brief glance, a silent acknowledgement of the pain, the betrayal, and the fragile hope we still shared. We had nothing, I once thought. Maybe we have something after all, and that is enough.